I think we do it for people that want to, just want to have an idea. You know what I mean? And we're on live, by the way, Mike. We just got on. So
Okay.
I'll read some comments as they come in, but this is Michael Fries. I'm saying that correct? Or is it Freeze?
Fries.
Fries. All right. Mike, last time we talked, was it, I think this last year, you were in your house. So it's good to see you out and about. Where are you right now this morning?
I'm actually at our office in Buffalo right now. It's one of the first days that I've been in the office instead of on the road giving a presentation for something or another, in the run up to the winter in a few weeks. But this week I'm actually at the office.
Very cool. So I'm glad you're with me. I appreciated our conversation last year. I don't know if you could see comments. I'm going to try to see if I could show. Can you see anything from your perspective of comments or anything?
Yes, I can see one that says, "Hey guys," right now.
Okay, cool. So what I'll do is while you're talking and we're conversing, I'll pop up one, questions we might get from people.
Okay.
But I thought you would appreciate the first slide I wanted to show everybody. This is probably in line of what most meteorologists are expecting. The old Farmer's Almanac, Mike.
Yeah.
Tell me your thoughts on the almanac.
Even as they say, even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while.
Exactly. I know. Every time someone says to me, and the funniest part is if you read the almanac, it'll give you precise 4 to 5 day forecasts out for like a year.
That's, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, it's something, all right. But instead of that, just as a serious topic, so we're in a lot of people might have seen online, how news travels, even if it's misinformation travels these days. It's what's being termed a triple dip La Nina. If you want to walk people through what that might mean to them.
Yeah, basically, if you look back at the last two winters, they were both La Nina winters, and we're set, as you're showing the graphic on the screen right now, to go into our third La Nina winter, which is pretty unusual. I think it's only the second or third time it's happened since they've been actively tracking the cycle in the equatorial Pacific. You might know better than I do. Is it the third time that we've had a triple dip?
I think it's at least the third. That's what I've researched. It's very rare.
And basically the history of tracking of these things essentially goes back to the beginning of the satellite age, was when they really started actively tracking this stuff. Granted, El Ninos and La Ninas and the ENSO cycle itself obviously goes back to when plate tectonics became out as they are now, when
it goes back as long as history goes back pretty much.
Post Pangea, so to speak.
Right.
This winter being the third one, that at least we're starting off, I think, somewhere on the border of a weak to moderate La Nina to start, and then
does it expected to go maybe more moderate with respect to the La Nina as we go in? Is that the forecast?
No, it actually is forecast to weaken to La Nada by the end of the winter, into the beginning of the spring.
I like La Nada.
La Nada or ENSO neutral, so neither El Nino nor La Nina. At least as of the update I saw from the CPC last Friday or the Friday before, I can't remember exactly. The climate ensembles had a 54% chance of it going to ENSO neutral by the February, March, April timeframe.
So with respect to that, what would be the estimated feedback, regionally, globally, to a change going to neutral? Like how long would it change to have an impactful effect on the, polar jet and just large scale patterns?
So, like right now, obviously from the graphic you're showing on the screen, we're in a pretty dominant La Nina pattern, and we're seeing that in terms of how the pattern is working in North America right now. If you look at the pattern over the U.S. right now, the Pacific Northwest and the Northern Rockies have been very cold, and they've been getting snow down into the valleys, even in Salt Lake and areas out there. So the pattern is developing very La Nina-ish. If we go toward a more ENSO neutral pattern, the ENSO cycle itself will become less dominant in terms of the way the pattern over North America works, which would allow,
by, like the NAO and the Arctic Oscillation of Matter.
Right. We'll start to become more dependent upon the evolution and the breakdown in the waves in the polar vortex, so to speak.
Yeah.
So there
The other
would be,
buzzword from the last 10 years,
yeah,
the
there
mighty
would,
polar vortex that's been there forever.
then we'll be sitting here waiting for, sort of some of the stratospheric warming events over the Arctic to start pushing cold air our way. It would seem that would mean the second half of our winter should probably trend colder than the first half anyway.
Okay. So yeah, so that would, if that pattern holds, I'm just putting up the seasonal maps right now, but so when people say, does that mean it's a milder winter? They ask that question. It might mean that maybe we have a pretty ease into winter, lots of warm-ups perhaps, and then maybe we get more consistent. Last February was probably our worst month last year.
Right.
So maybe that would occur again, perhaps.
Yeah, actually, both of the last 2 years, I think February was our cold month of the winter. And I mean, looking at our near-term climate outlooks,
Right.
it certainly looks like next weekend, and then probably for a week to 10 days beyond that, we're going to be very cold.
Right.
Our forecasters have been bandying about lake effect snow starting, the second half of next weekend, and the pattern looks good after that.
Maybe we get a white Thanksgiving instead of a white Christmas this year.
Yeah, it seems like we've been getting more of those than white Christmases recently, but it's certainly possible. But that a couple of weeks does not a seasonal outlook make, right? And plus the meteorological winter, as we call it, doesn't even start till December 1st. So when we talk about the winter outlook, we talk about December, January, and February.
Right.
So that's the maps that you're showing here: December,
right.
January, February.
And this also, this ends at the end of February, so it's not truly, a total forecast for what March can obviously bring as well, which is on the temperature map here. Your seasonal outlook kind of gives us a kind of an equal chance of a usual winter, perhaps.
Right. Yeah. And the way that we're sort of thinking about it is with the waning La Nina toward the end of the winter, it may be that the first half, 2/3 of the winter ends up warmer than normal, and the last half or third of the winter ends up a little bit colder than normal. So we end up with, a forecast of, sort of equal chances of above and below. So
here's a question from Glenn Effinger. And, this is one that I always struggle with too. He says, I'm so accustomed to mild winters in New York. This area no longer is like what it was 30 or 40 years ago. How would you respond to what that statement?
I mean, a lot of our what happens during our winter is really greatly affected by how cold the winter is upstream, right? To get really cold air into Western New York, we need to freeze Lake Erie. We need to freeze at least the majority of Lake Huron and have significant ice cover on Superior and Michigan as well.
Right.
And that's a lot of cold air that has to be resident for a long time.
And you need a lot of snow upstream as well to keep the air masses progressively getting colder.
Right. And I mean, in the past 10 years, we have had 2 winters that have been really cold. I forget if they were like 14 and 16 or something like that.
We had the coldest month in our recorded history within the last 10 years.
Right.
February of what, 14, 13?
But there's also this, how should I say, the way that people think about historical weather is different than the way that it actually evolves, right? People remember big events. They remember when it was really cold. Yep. Like personally me, it was the winter of 94, I think it was, when we had some incredibly cold air that came down in the Great Lakes.
January of 94, we had 60 inches of Rochester snow in a month. Yeah. Most ever. I've never heard of anything like that.
Me as a kid at that time, I remember that as being like the apex of winter, right? When it was as cold as it could possibly ever get. Meanwhile, I remember the 80s being the decade that we never had winter, right? There was nothing. And at the same time, the 70s were a decade when we had winter.
Brutal. The late 50s were brutal. The 60s were quiet. The 40s were quiet. As a matter of fact, I used to do a big thing when I would present to people about snowfall, and I asked them, what are the snowiest, if you take the average snowfall in a 30-year period, what have been the 30th snowy years? And they always go back to when they were a kid, and they're always wrong. Right. It was the last 30 years.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah,
had
I
more
mean,
snow as an average in Rochester in the last 30 years.
well, even if you want to just look at the last 10 years, maybe or so, um, the I would say the Central Great Lakes, let's put it that way, Central and Eastern Great Lakes have gotten more snow from large scale weather systems than probably historically they used to.
Right.
Um,
And
you
that
know,
actually would lead me to this question here that Linda asks is how much is climate change, or could it be, or do we know what the impact of climate change is on not just La Nina and the ENSO cycle, but even our regional weather?
yeah, we can't tie it one to one with any particular weather system, but there is certainly a larger propensity for both moisture flux into our region as well as heat flux into our region. And people think of heat flux meaning, oh, it's going to rain more. Yeah, it probably will rain more, but it'll also snow more, just
Right.
by virtue of the fact that the air can hold more moisture.
There's more available
So
moisture. Yeah.
almost all of the climate sites in the Great Lakes are seeing increases in their annual snowfall.
Right.
Um, they may not be seeing increases in their annual days of snow on the ground, though,
Right.
which is very noticeable in Western New York
Right.
in terms of the amount of days with more than an inch of snow on the ground.
What are the numbers roughly behind that in the last 30 years or so?
I don't have them in front
Yeah.
of me, but
Generally.
it's noticeable. I
Yeah.
mean, we in all of the climate sites in our area, we've seen increases in temperature every month of the year, except in the spring. Our springs are actually colder than they have been, and maybe you noticed this, but the especially April has turned into what I would colloquially call a garbage month. Um, where it's too
Overcast,
cold to get out and
miserable.
do stuff, and it's not warm enough to, or it's too cold to do anything springtime, but not warm enough, or but too warm to do winter stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
We're kind of like lagging.
right,
And that's not good for April 8th, 2024,
right.
with the solar eclipse
Eclipse,
coming.
yeah, right.
But that's a StreamYard for another time. So let's see. Mike here says that most of our snow has always been lake effect. That's not, I don't know how you could phrase that differently, but I mean,
Yeah,
obviously, lake, I always try to explain to people there's a big difference between the pure lake effect and lake enhanced,
right.
which is a fair amount of our, from a synoptic scale system, that we get enhancement, right?
Yeah, particularly the last couple of years, especially from the Genesee Valley eastward, there have been multiple large-scale weather systems that have come through and dumped, a foot and a half, two
Yeah.
feet of snow. And, if you would have talked to the forecasters at the office here historically, they would have said, "Oh, we don't get big, large-scale snows.
Right.
If we do, we change to rain, and then the lake effect on the back end is where we get all the snow."
Right.
And we've managed to do it a few times.
Yeah, and Genesee Valley historically has been pretty much a like a snow desert, just because of all
right,
the downsloping you could get there, and you're too far from the lakes, and
right,
it's just amazing how local our climate can be.
right.
So
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, any winter outlook here, lake effect is always the wild card, right?
right,
Because lake effect is so individual event dependent, right? Like if you get, we're talking about seasonal outlooks, and within a season you can have several bursts that last a few days of really cold air that come through that
right.
aren't big enough to have an influence on the way that the entire season looks.
But people
But
sure remember it.
yeah, they remember it, and those bursts can result in insane amounts of snow sometimes.
Yeah,
So they affect your overall seasonal numbers that way.
it's definitely more favorable in your town in Buffalo than it is in Rochester. Our city needs a northeast wind to get our best lake
Right.
snow, and
Well, I know there was the one event, was it last year or the year before, where we could actually see the lake enhanced band on the northeast flow coming into the Lake Ontario shore underneath
yes,
large scale system snow. And I'm just like, man, somebody's going to get crushed, whether it's in
the Cedar
Monroe
Feeder.
or Orleans County or wherever it was. Somebody was going to get a lot more because that
Yeah,
band was there.
feeding effect is just phenomenal. It doesn't
Right.
happen all the time here, but when it does, it's great.
Right.
So anything else you want to say to people about what we're expecting? I mean, obviously you kind of hinted if we go neutral, you're probably of the mind that maybe the second half of the winter would be more winter-like.
Yeah, I know a couple of our forecasters here locally have done some work on this in terms of, there's a lot of snowheads here, right? A lot of forecasters that love the snow, and I mean, if you work in Western New York, you kind of have to.
Yeah, we're gluttons for punishment here.
Whether it's Buffalo, Rochester, Watertown, all the places, Syracuse for that matter, even though it's not one of our cities, but if you work in any of these places, you got to like it. I mean, because we spend a lot of the year dealing with it. And the one thing that one of the forecasters did, looking at some of the climate composites, going back several decades, is that most of our colder than normal winters are winters that are between Enso neutral, so La Nada, as I was calling it, and weak La Ninas, right? So take that for what it's worth. That's probably at least the second half of the winter. That's where we'll be playing, so to speak.
Yeah. So we could hedge that. Maybe we get a pretty, at least a couple. I mean, I always say that most winters have a good 4 to 6 week period of brutality being laid upon us at some point. And then maybe that's February, early March this year.
Obviously, I saw the comment here about an ice storm, and it's been a while since we've had a good one. So I
hate to say we're due. Yeah. 03 was the last really meaningful ice storm here.
Yeah, it's been a while, and we've had. We were looking back. Was it in 99 or 98 when the North Country up toward Montreal had a colossal
that Canadian ice storm was awful.
For some reason, that was showing up in a lot of the things that we were looking at this year, just in terms of preparation for things and whatnot. Don't want to say that'll happen, but it's certainly in the back of our head.
Meteorologically, things repeat themselves. And I try to tell people that it is hard in the forest of climate change to understand that there are regional and local cycles and impacts as well that you just can't understand until you get close to them. And that's what winter is. I mean, it's La Ninas, and these things don't affect the summer patterns as much for us in the Northeast. Although it's been we have a nationwide drought right now.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, we're one of the few places that's lucky to not be in one, even though we were for at least the first half of the summer anyway. Really, probably most of the summer.
I know we in Rochester, I think, are about 6. I don't know what yesterday's rain did, but around 6.5 inches below for the year.
Right.
It's a pretty significant number.
That's, I mean, and our numbers pale in comparison to some of the places in the West and Southwest.
Yeah, and this isn't a drought buster out West, right, Mike, this year?
Nope, probably not. I mean, I was thankful to see they got some snow in the Sierras here this past week, so that's helpful, but it's, as they say, a drop in the bucket.
And I know that, we came on to talk about, winter, but before I let you go, it's always good to talk to somebody with the expertise you have about climate and understanding of it. I mean, what's going on out West is alarming when you look at the deficit. I got married or engaged on Lake Mead in 1999. I got engaged, right? And it was all the way up in 1999. And now virtually, if this continues, this is a big problem out West.
Right. And I mean, La Nina certainly isn't helping it for the past 3 years, because that's a pattern that doesn't result in a lot of precipitation during the time of the year they need it.
Yeah, good El Nino would help them.
And this past warm season, the monsoon into the Southwest actually resulted in a lot more rainfall than they normally get in places like Tucson and Phoenix and Las Vegas and whatnot. A lot of those places out there got multiple years worth of rainfall during their monsoon season. Right. So the problem is all that water runs off because it's like rain falling on your driveway. Yeah. In terms of how the ground sucks it up there. It really doesn't. And
then it evaporates like crazy and transpirates like crazy.
Well, and the Great Lakes, if you turn back the clock, 10 or 15 years, all the Great Lakes were really, really far down. If you recall, people were complaining on Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, because there was no water, and they couldn't put their boat in. Their dock didn't have enough water. They'd have to extend their dock. And now, was it 2017, 2019? There's too much water all of a sudden.
Yeah. And that's going to happen again too.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, in that regard, most of the climate solutions that we see actually have the Great Lakes being one of the areas of the country least affected in terms of that by climate change, as opposed to the rest of the country. So
everybody's going to be moving up here.
Yeah. I mean,
and it's funny. I'll still get the questions, my favorite question I hate to answer is, do you believe in, climate change. I'm like, well, it's not like going to church. And this is not faith. It's science, and it's occurring.
Yeah.
It really is. And that's, if you don't see the evidence, then you're not looking.
Right. And I mean, one good thing, I guess, in terms of, people moving farther north again. And I don't mean to reference your shirt, but there would be more Bills fans then, right?
Hey, listen, we got a big game. What's your prediction on the game this weekend? And should I wear this shirt there?
I don't know. I mean, I went to grad school at Wisconsin, right? And so the game last week, my Facebook feed was, half people, saying, "Oh, what's going to happen with the Packers?" And then half people, "Oh, the Bills, yada yada yada."
Yeah.
Well, obviously,
I know what's going to happen with the Packers now, man. They're terrible.
After what they did in Detroit yesterday, the Packers laid an egg there.
If you can't beat Detroit, that's bad.
Yeah. And I'm originally from Detroit, so
I'm not really sad about Aaron Rodgers doing poorly. As a Viking fan, I've hated the Packers for many decades.
Yeah, I didn't think there'd be a week where both Aaron Rodgers and Josh Allen were turnover machines, but that's certainly what happened.
Yeah, that was weird. And next week, I personally know my team well enough to know that they get me to a certain level and then they disappoint me, So I know they're going to get their butts kicked Sunday. I'm pretty sure they're going to lose by 2 touchdowns Sunday.
Yeah. Well, I have a feeling the Bills will turn it around in short order. I mean,
the Bills are a great team. They just got a lot of injuries. That's all.
It seemed like Josh Allen was flogging himself in the post-game interviews enough that he'll get it put together. So
he's a super competitive guy. He's not allowed to have a bad week. I mean,
we all do once in a while.
That's right. Even as forecasters, we have a bad week once in a while.
I tell you what, there are some times where you get to the end of a week and you've been working on some big system and you're feel good about the forecast and then Mother Nature just beats you up.
Yeah. I remember that there's that one storm my proudest forecasting moment was this one storm. It was about 10 years ago, and everybody was predicting a major snow event. I was at 6:00 that night. You guys were. But the one thing I was worried about was the track. It was tracking right over Lake Erie, the center of the low. And I looked at pressure tendency, You ever go to that website, coolweather.com? They have but there's one, they have this great hourly update of pressure tendency. And I'm looking at it and I'm seeing where this low is going toward. Low pressure's got to go toward low pressure falls. Sure. And it's tracking west. And I'm like, there's no way we get a big snow with a westward tracking low over Lake Erie going west of it. It's not going to happen. It's too much warm air. We're going to change over to sleet and then maybe back on the lake effect, as you said. So I looked at Erie, Pennsylvania that night after I got off my show, and it was 19 degrees and raining, freezing rain. 19, right? So what was the temperature at cloud level? So I was like, there's no way this is going to be a big snow. So I went and told my news director, I'm like, I'm changing the forecast 3 to 5, ice, and then some lake effect. Everybody was going 10 to 15 inches of snow, like a morning event, like 10 to 15 in the morning, which is bad, right?
Right.
So I went out there and said that at 10 and 11, and it did verify. I was very fortunate. You know what I did all night? I listened for sleet until 3 in the morning. As soon as I heard sleet.
the one big synoptic large scale snow last winter, the one where here in Buffalo we had 4 and 5 inches of snow per hour for I think 3 hours.
That was incredible.
We watched on the radar as the mixed precip line literally came up to Buffalo, pivoted, and then went the other way. So Rochester got way less snow from that system than we did in Buffalo. I think I don't remember if we got 18 or 21 inches here. I can't remember what it was by the end of it, but our forecasters were really nervous going into it because first of all, it wasn't snowing hard enough. And then all of a sudden, the changeover line came out and I was at the office for part of it and it was like snowing frying pans outside. It was snowing so hard.
I remember that.
Meanwhile, I think we had 8 to 10 inches of snow in the forecast in the southern tier or something like that. And I think they got like 3 or 4 because it was all sleet. Yeah. And if you've ever tried to move 3 or 4 inches of sleet, that's way worse than moving a foot of snow.
Oh yeah. I think people prefer that in many ways. Would rather have the big snow than the sleety stuff.
Oh yeah.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate your time so much, Mike.
For sure. Have a good one.
This will live on our StreamYard and on our site, so it'll be there for people to look at down the road. But it's kind of hard at 11 o'clock to get a big audience, but we've had a pretty good amount watching for the morning. So thank you.
Anytime.
All right, buddy. We'll do it again. I'll be in touch. Have a great winter. Okay.
You too.
All right, man. See ya.